havoc of destruction. For those who control Grayskull control the power.
I used to think Castle Grayskull was just a building that Skeletor obsessed himself with, but only when I started working on this video did I realize just how many lives this ancient mystical property had lived. And it went way beyond tropes like a big skull castle, sorceress inside, He-Man outside, and Skeletor yelling somewhere because nobody's letting him in. Researching Castle Grayskull's entire history told me how it was once the Hall of Wisdom, about its ties to King Grayskull and how it housed not one, but two of the most potent wisdoms in all of Eternia. Then there's like portals, secret chambers, a bottomless abyss and whatnot. But fret not, friends, because in this video, I'm going to explore the complete history of Castle Grayskull for you. That too, from the mini comic days up until the 2026 live action movie. So without further ado, let's begin. Castle Grayskull in the mini comics, when He-Man was a barbarian, not a prince. Before He-Man was Prince Adam, before there was King Randor, before there was the evil Uncle Keldor, before everything, He-Man was simply a barbarian, the greatest warrior of a tribe. This is the story from the He-Man mini-comics, which started the saga of He-Man. And of course, Castle Grayskull featured heavily in these stories, starting with a comic called He-Man and the Power Sword. One day, He-Man figured that Castle Grayskull needed to be protected, because evil forces were trying to take over Eternia, and anyone that controlled the mighty castle not only gained access to its deepest secrets and powers, but would also be capable of controlling not just the entirety of Eternia, but the entire universe. On his journey to the castle, he saves the sorceress from a shaggy monster. Unlike her whole Falcon theme that we know now, she was all about cobras back in the day. Anyway, He-Man saves her by showing exemplary strength and courage, and as a result, she gives him treasures that Eternian scientists had created before the Great War. These are basically weapons, a costume that shielded him from incoming damage, and even a vehicle, which He-Man says was part battering ram and part space warp device. Anyway, while He-Man made his way to the castle, someone else was also heading there. Yeah, Skeletor had abducted Teela, who was supposed to be a warrior goddess in the mini-comics, and intends to take her as his bride. By nightfall, Skeletor and Beastman brought their sleeping captive, Teela, to Castle Grayskull, and opened its drawbridge by using his magic. But the spirit of the castle warned Skeletor. Yeah, so the castle had its in-house spirit, one that was no better than today's United Nations, often warning countries or condemning their actions, but that's about it. Skeletor doesn't give two shits about the spirit's warnings and does what he needs to do. One thing you have to note here is that Skeletor possessed one half of the Power Sword, and the other half remained in the castle, along with its secrets and powers. Skeletor had come here to find the other half of the sword so that he could combine the two halves and become invincible. And not just that, he was actually an alien from another dimension in the mini-comics. So he wanted to use the combined sword to open up a portal that would allow his kind to come to Eternia and take it over. Anyway, Castle Grayskull was nothing less than a maze, and Beastman started searching its grounds for anything valuable, until he came up with a scroll written in blood, and only Skeletor could read the contents of this scroll. He soon learned the location of a fiery sword hidden in the castle grounds. Meanwhile, Man-at-Arms, whose people were masters of all weapons, came to He-Man to tell him that Skeletor had breached the walls of Castle Grayskull, and was looking for the other half of the Power Sword. He-Man, without wasting any time, used his space-warping vehicle to reach the castle. Meanwhile, Skeletor and his bestial henchmen reached this rusty metal door at the end of one of Castle Grayskull's secret passageways. But as they touched the door, the spirit of the castle once again appeared to curse them and released ghostly demons. But Skeletor's lightning blade, that is his half of the Power Sword, blasted the ghostly demons into nothingness, after which he headed to seize the greatest treasure that the castle had to offer. Meanwhile, He-Man had made his approach, and Beastman went to the castle's roof, where there was an energy cannon that Beastman used against the heroic barbarian. Back in the castle's tunnel, the skull-faced alien demon found the shiny blade and joined it with his own. And no sooner had he done that than he could feel the unbelievable energies of the sword as it burst into green fire. But outside, Man-at-Arms had joined He-Man in his fight against Beastman. So Skeletor too joined the fray, and nearly defeated He-Man. But then the sorceress came to the help of the good guys, and with her intervention, the combined power of the sword once again split into two halves. Teela had also found her consciousness and joined the two Masters of the Universe in their fight against the forces of evil. And soon enough, Skeletor and Beastman found themselves running with their lives in their palms. But the Masters knew that this was far from over. In the end, the sorceress created 2 enchanted locks, and only the 2 halves of the Power Sword would serve as the key to open the drawbridge of Castle Grayskull. The story ends here, only to resume in the next one, which is the King of Castle Grayskull. This one starts with a bit of an info dump about Castle Grayskull from He-Man and his mansplaining ways to Battle Cat. The warrior reveals that the castle was built by unknown hands before the Great Wars, and anyone who controls the castle controls the universe. But Skeletor was on the parapet of the castle and went unnoticed by He-Man. The Dark Lord then used his magical blades to see what was going on inside the castle, and saw a conversation between the warrior goddess Teela and the sorceress. From the sorceress, Skeletor learns that 1 half of the Power Sword was now hidden at Eternia's highest point, and the other beneath its hardest rock. Not only that, Teela was now the guardian of Castle Grayskull, like she was going to serve like a Castellan here. Anyway, after overhearing the details, Skeletor immediately left to find the 2 halves of the sword, and he managed to get hold of both halves. And after that, he left Merman to finish the fallen He-Man, and he set out on foot for Castle Grayskull, and paused only to disguise his scully face with grayish clay. This he did to fool people into believing that he was King Grayskull. You get the point, right? Like he had a skull face, and now it was gray. So, Grayskull? It's all very intelligent, yeah. Anyway, after reaching the castle, he boldly thrust both halves of the Power Sword into the stone lock that the sorceress had previously created and entered the building. As expected by him, Teela mistook him for King Grayskull and allowed him to enter the throne room and to take King Grayskull's very throne. Now, the thing is, the seat of King Grayskull was like super advanced, with all kinds of buttons and shit. And these things not only allowed the one sitting on the throne to have their eyes and ears across the castle, but the person also had a number of buttons at his disposal, which he could use to unleash traps. For instance, he used one such trap to send Teela tumbling down into a prison, and used another to send He-Man in that prison with her. All these computers, monitor screens, weapons, and many wonderful controls, all of them were Skeletor's now. And he started to believe that he was the king now. He soon started to study the many marvels of the castle, and it didn't take long to become a champion of the tricks that the castle hid within its walls. He could also see He-Man defeating Merman through one of the screens, and prepared for the warrior's arrival. When He-Man approached, Skeletor himself opened the drawbridge, only to entrap the barbarian hero. But with their combined strength, Teela and He-Man managed to escape, but not before fighting a number of empty suits of armor and their weapons. And yes, it was once again Skeletor who had sent these minions, thanks to his mastery of the castle and its devices. But then, as Skeletor was engaging with He-Man, Teela knocked the Power Sword out of his hand. Immediately enough, Skeletor lost control of Castle Grayskull and its many powers. He fled to the roof, and the 2 masters followed him, only to be attacked by the castle's laser cannons. But He-Man took care of him soon enough, and Skeletor once again fled. With Skeletor departed, the spirit of the castle appeared again and said, "I must make sure that the halves of the Power Sword are never again used for evil. I'll send them to another dimension where even clever Skeletor will have great difficulty finding them." All's well, but Skeletor? Clever? That's really silly statement. But before disappearing, the spirit of the castle did say that one day the true king will arrive. Now, while the mini-comics had more stories where Castle Grayskull appeared, most of the history was contained in the 2 stories I just explored for you. And with that, it's time to move to other installments and versions, beginning with the Castle Grayskull that appeared in the Hall of Wisdom version of Castle Grayskull. Now, this version gave Castle Grayskull a much grander past, because before it had that giant skull face and the whole "please do not enter" energy, it was actually the Hall of Wisdom. In the read-along book Castle Grayskull, the hall was described as a beautiful place, the center of Eternian culture, and also a storehouse for all the knowledge of the universe. So yeah, not a small deal at all. The Council of Elders used the hall as their place of assembly, until one day they saw a vision of a beautiful woman in snake armor. She warned them about a future danger, and also told them that He-Man would arrive one day. So the Elders did what ancient magical elders usually do in these stories. They placed all their power into one magical orb. They then changed the Hall of Wisdom into Castle Grayskull, so intruders would stay away and the orb would remain safe. This all happened centuries before He-Man's time. After that, the castle was mostly forgotten, until Man-at-Arms later led Prince Adam there, and Adam used the Sword of Power to become He-Man. And now, let's get to the first ever animated version of the castle.
And who might you be?
I am the guardian of the secrets of Castle Grayskull.
The Filmation cartoon, Castle Grayskull. Now, the Filmation cartoon version of Castle Grayskull very much got inspired from the old storyline, or should I say the old myth, if you want to remain in universe, but then added its own several layers to that, thereby turning it into this full-on legendary fortress, and yeah, if I'm being honest, this version had that exact sort of location you would expect from Eternia. In the Filmation cartoons, the castle basically stood on a pedestal of bones, which rose out of a bottomless abyss in a barren plain near the edge of the evergreen forest. It does sound like super creepy, and yeah, it definitely doesn't sound like it was a friendly neighborhood. Castle Grayskull was the kind of place where you could tell even from far away that something ancient and powerful had been locked away there. Anyway, in this version, Castle Grayskull served as the home of the sorceress, and it also became a place of refuge for He-Man and the people he considered his friends. As is the case with most Masters of the Universe iterations, the detail and exact origins of the famous castle is not really explained in any great depth, but we did learn about the basic idea behind the castle and how it had been built to protect some unknown source of power from anyone who would use it for the wrong reasons. And because of that, obviously every evil force on Eternia kept going after it. Prince Adam, who you know becomes He-Man, also said that the walls of Castle Grayskull had been made from the hardest substance on the planet, which made sense because if you had to protect a power source that every monster and skull-faced lunatic wanted, normal stone's not going to do the trick. And as far as this so-called hardest substance on Eternia, some comics and cartoons have actually said that it's called Eternium, but then we've seen some instances say that it's very brittle. In fact, Trapjaw once ate a bit of Eternium and ended up becoming so powerful that he almost defeated He-Man, and it was only after Eternium's effect waned that He-Man could defeat Trapjaw. Most of the time, we saw the castle from the outside with that huge skull face and the jaw bridge, which was basically the lower jaw of the castle's mouth used as a drawbridge. Like, jawbridge was just a play on the word drawbridge. Anyway, the cartoon did give us a few important parts inside the castle as well. There was the main chamber, which included the walkway of the elders, and then there was the throne room, the hall of He-Man, the portal chamber, a laboratory, the mirror room, the sorceress's den and bedchamber in the right tower, and also the Gallery of Living Pictures. That last room was used in the episode titled The Greatest Adventures of All, to display what the sorceress called the greatest adventures of the Masters of the Universe, especially He-Man himself. So yeah, Castle Grayskull had its own version of a museum. The castle also had deeper secrets because an evil duplicate of He-Man's friend Koldar once came across a chamber that held the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This room had two doors with a guardian placed between them. One door led to the secrets, while the other led to destruction. I mean, it does sound like a super simple choice, except that this is Castle Grayskull, and even the most simple-looking door test often has very serious and very real life-or-death consequences. The castle was also the place where the two transcendent magic swords were housed, so naturally its importance went far beyond being a spooky skull castle. Around the castle, the Abyss basically served like a natural moat in at least one episode, and it was not only there for looks. In fact, in the episode titled Into the Abyss, Teela fell into it and saw a strange sight from below as sparks rose from the abyss toward He-Man's sword when Prince Adam became He-Man. In that same episode, He-Man said the abyss actually led to the center of Eternia, because apparently Grayskull didn't believe in small mystery. And then there were the magical doors inside the castle, mostly in the portal chamber. These doors led to different places across Eternia, which included Snake Mountain, and at least one door led to Etheria. But one of the most dangerous entrances led to the Chamber of Life. Its magic was so risky that even the sorceress couldn't control it, and only mortals could enter. He-Man did this when he took a fuzzbee named Birdie inside to save its life, which showed that Castle Grayskull is not only a fortress of secrets, but also a place where power, danger, and hope live side by side. Oh, and how could I forget? In the 1985 series She-Ra, the Princess of Power, the castle appeared during the beginning of the transformation sequences. Here, Grayskull is replaced by the Crystal Castle, while the said location itself appears in various episodes of the series. Now, let's talk about the 2002 reboot and King Grayskull. Now, the 2002 reboot didn't see Castle Grayskull as simply a scary old fortress with a skull face. I mean, there was so much more to the spooky castle than that, and thankfully so. This version gave the castle a very detailed and important royal history. You see, the castle had once been the home of King Grayskull, an ancestor of Prince Adam. I did mention King Grayskull in one of the previous entries, specifically the mini-comic one, but the mini-comics didn't give much information about the namesake of Castle Grayskull. But that changed in the 2002 series, where this guy was more than an old king who built a castle. Much more than that. He had died while he defended his kingdom and all of Eternia from Hordak. So yeah, the stakes were high. Before his death, King Grayskull placed his power into his sword, and the sword would later become the basis of He-Man's own power. His wife, Vina, became the first sorceress, while the advisors became the Council of Elders. Interestingly, Veena was also the name of an Indian string instrument that is actually played by one of the Hindu goddesses named Saraswati, and it's one very random piece of information that I happen to know. Moving on, King Grayskull also had this enormous green lion as his mount, and we definitely know someone who uses a giant green cat as his mount. Any guesses? Any guesses at all? Well, yeah, you're thinking of the right guy. And as for King Grayskull's green lion mount, he had the same armor style as Battlecat. So if we do the math, the story is basically trying to tell us that Battlecat later got his power from the green lion. The castle itself also got a much storied history in this version. One of the most important additions was the Crystal Chamber, which could only be reached through a secret door in the floor of a secluded chamber. Inside it was the Orb of Power, and within that orb was the combined power of the Elders. Before Prince Adam received it, the Sword of Power had also been kept within the Crystal Chamber, where the sword had been kept safely protected from anyone who wandered into the castle walls, or people who did not belong there. We also saw, or rather learned, about several other parts of the castle. Much like the Filmation series, the 2002 version also had this very elegant and giant throne room, but there were other rooms too, and all with different purposes. For instance, we had a huge library, a room with an enormous mystical mirror that could view the past and present, an underground coliseum, a secret chamber devoted to King Grayskull, the area behind the eye sockets of the castle's face, and many other corridors covered in illusions that were basically meant to confuse invaders. As for the build, long ago the castle had been made of white marble and stood at the center of King Grayskull's busy kingdom. But after the terrible battle with Hordak's forces, it fell into ruin, and over countless years people almost forgot it. And in the end, when Adam became He-Man, only a select few knew its true purpose and secrets. And like the Filmation version, it still had a bottomless abyss around it, because, of course it did. Castle Grayskull in Masters of the Universe Revelation. With Masters of the Universe Revelation, we went back to the age-old concept of the Hall of Wisdom. But of course, there was still a bit of extra detail added in that made this version unique in its own right. In this version, the castle had first been the Hall of Wisdom, and that hall had served as the great storage place for all the knowledge and stuff from the entire universe. You heard that right. This was the grandest archive of all times and housed every bit of knowledge ever. The Council of Elders had also gathered there, and at one point, they placed their power into the Orb of Power. And in order to keep that orb safe, the so-called Grand Hall was hidden behind a false face. And it was this false face that later came to be known as Castle Grayskull. And around 500 years before events, we find in Revelation, the then King of Eternia, that is King Grayskull, had been living at this castle with his two young sons, Dare and Ro, where he taught them how to be good princes and trained them to become better versions of themselves. And in effect, he was just trying to turn them into men from boys. But then the peace disappeared when the Snake Men attacked the castle, and this time around the Snake Men had not come alone. They'd brought a new ally with them in the form of someone called Orlax of Primaria. The problem before King Grayskull was huge, and he had to do something about it. As a result of this very woe, he decided to forge a new and powerful weapon, one that would save his realm and its people. To fight Orlax, what King Grayskull forged was the legendary and iconic Sword of Power. He did this by uniting his own Preternian weapon with another blade, one made from dark ore he had taken from Subternian. Now, what this essentially means is that the sword that later became so important and rather central to He-Man and all of his stories had roots in both Preternia as well as Subternia. But as the battle raged on, things started to look grimmer than ever, which is when the Grayskull family also received help from a hero who had come from the future. And this mighty and brave hero used his own sword to sever a tentacle from the beast that Grayskull had been trying to fight and destroy. In fact, this hero also warned King Grayskull that the Hall of Wisdom's exact location and all of its secrets should and must be concealed at all costs. Not only that, he encouraged young Ro to keep up his lessons with his father, because one day he would need those lessons desperately and gravely. After these events, the hall was covered by the face of a helmeted skull, and that castle took the name of King Grayskull in his honor. And across several centuries, many guardians stood watch over the castle, with the sorceress as the latest one we knew in this era. Many heroes also wielded the Sword of Power across time. In the first, after King Grayskull, had been his own son, who we later learned was the man who they called Hero. And of course, the latest one in that long line of wielders of the Sword of Power was none other than He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. So the sword had a whole family tree of muscle and destiny behind it, which, let's be honest, Sounds very Eternia. But of course, that's not the end of it, because then came Skeletor. The guy had spent years after the secret of Grayskull, and at last he learned that the castle itself was not the real prize. It had been a shell, built to guard the Orb of Power. So Skeletor made his move with the Shaping Staff and disguised himself as Spikehor, while Evelyn disguised herself as Clawful. And together they pretended as if He-Man had captured them. Except this He-Man was not He-Man at all. It was Faker, the robot. I mean, say what you will about Skeletor, but his plan sometimes has several levels. Weird levels, but levels nonetheless. Anyway, this trick fooled the sorceress long enough for Skeletor and Evelyn to gain entry into Grayskull. And once they were inside, Skeletor ordered the rest of his forces to attack the castle in full force, because he knew the heroic warriors and the royal guards would rush to defend it. So, while everyone dealt with the battle outside, Skeletor pushed deeper into the castle and reached the heart of Grayskull. There, he defeated Mossman, who was a powerful nature god, and died a very unceremonious death in the latest Masters of the Universe movie. But anyway, after this, Skeletor then forced He-Man into doing exactly what he wanted. Skeletor placed himself in such a way that He-Man's sword pierced him, and also struck the Orb of Power. And the blade, as Skeletor had predicted, acted like a key. Then Skeletor struck the orb with the Havoc Staff, and the crack that followed released the magic that created Eternia and the universe itself. Great work, Mr. Boneface. The sorceress understood that all reality was now at risk, but she managed to pause time for a short period so she could speak with He-Man and Teela. He-Man tried to draw the orb's power into his sword, but the weapon was split in two. With the power gone, Battle Cat changed back into Cringer, and He-Man returned to Prince Adam, while Skeletor then tried to seize both halves of the sword. But the magical blast destroyed both him and Adam, and after the resultant impact, only the top piece of Skeletor's Havoc Staff remained. After all this, King Randor declared Castle Grayskull off limits. But Cringer, however, found enough courage to defy that order, and stayed there to guard the sorceress. Her power had begun to fade because Eternia had almost no magic left, so she reached out to Evelyn for help. And against all odds and belief, Evelyn then hired Teela and her new crime partner, named Andra, to search for a magic relic. The sorceress gave the final spark of magic to Evelyn's staff, which completely drained her, yes. But then, as she fell, Cringer caught her, and now they needed another sorceress. And everyone looked at Teela, who did not want the burden at first, but she accepted the mantle of the sorceress in order to find the two halves of the power sword. Oh yeah, those halves had returned to their points of origin, one in Sub-Eternia and the other in Pre-Eternia. In fact, Cringer was the one who convinced her to go and do her duty towards Eternia and all the universe, while he himself remained at Castle Grayskull to care for the sorceress. Later, Teela went to Duncan, her adoptive father, because she wanted him to forge the sword back into one piece once the halves were found. But when Roboto offered to take Duncan's place, Teela told Duncan to go to Castle Grayskull instead and help to defend the powerless sorceress.
If you keep breaking my new toys, you'll just have to play with the old ones.
Grayskull became the battleground between magic and technology in Revolution. In the 5th episode of the series, that is, The Scepter and the Sword, Castle Grayskull had once again become ground zero in all of Eternian's problems. He-Man had his new power sword ready, Teela had her new sorceress level situation to deal with, and Skeletor still had to be dealt with. Anyway, once the heroes had their rules set, He-Man headed to Castle Grayskull. But things were going to go to shit from here on out. The nanovirus from the previous episodes had already spread throughout the people, and He-Man's first priority was to cure them. He went to Castle Grayskull and used the upgraded power sword to deal with the virus. Yeah, this version of the Sword of Power had been transformed into much more than a blade that slashed and hurt enemies of He-Man's. It had also become a kind of cure, which I mean is super convenient, but oftentimes we've seen how one magical object solves 3 problems at once in Eternia. Like, you remember that ride from He-Man's in the mini-comics, right? And the various things it could do? So this trope has always been there. Anyway, at Castle Grayskull, He-Man managed to help the infected people, and that took care of one huge problem before the story moved back to Skeletor and his old shenanigans. After that, Grayskull turned into the main war zone because it was here that Skeletor and the heroes ended up in a huge battle, like all around the castle. There were many machines in the fight, possibly monstroids, and the whole thing became one of those final act Eternian clashes where everyone with a sword, spell, claw, or grudge seems to be involved. Granomir also joined the battle and died while he protected Teela. while she was busy with the repair of Eternia. And yeah, even though the fight had taken place around Grayskull, the larger spiritual side of Eternia had to be fixed at the same time for things to come back to normal. And if that wasn't achieved, all that the heroic warriors did would have gone in vain. Teela managed to restore Eternia at the right moment. And because of that, the souls who belonged there were able to appear again. This included King Grayskull, and with that, Castle Grayskull elevated from being a battleground or a castle, and it became the point where the old heroes of Eternia and the current heroes crossed paths. King Randor was also amongst the souls who joined in the fight, and several of them helped beat Skeletor down, which, I have to agree and admit, was one of the most satisfying sequences in the entire season, especially after everything he'd done. I mean, when the dead themselves come to take care of your villain problem and beat the living shit out of that skull-faced evil sorcerer, you know the situation has crossed every normal limit. Skeletor still tried one last trick, and he attempted to send King Randor to Subternia, but He-Man ended the matter by driving the Power Sword into him. And because of the sword's anti-nanovirus upgrade, Skeletor changed back into Keldor. Oh yeah, Skeletor had received a tech upgrade in this installment of the franchise. After all this, He-Man and Teela later walked through the ruined palace and spoke about their futures. Their plan was to live together at Castle Grayskull itself, and by doing so, they would be able to join their strengths in protecting the castle and ensuring that no untoward incident happened in the future. The true origin of Castle Grayskull. Now, this version went right into the secret past of He-Man's lore, and in doing so, it answered one of the oldest questions of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. In the currently ongoing comic titled He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, The Sword of Flaws, and more specifically its third issue, the story dealt with a new power sword that had been found in the Caird of Panthenon's mountain range. Naturally, He-Man and Skeletor both wanted to reach it first, and I'm sorry, but by now it seems like if a magical sword appears anywhere on Eternia, these two seem to be contractually required to turn it into a scuffle between them. Of course, the reasons are different. He-Man wants to protect the power while Skeletor only wants to abuse it. But either way, the two men can't seem to catch a break. This would be a good opportunity to put in a product placement for Kit Kat. But unfortunately, nobody's contacted us. Come on, Kit Kat, what do we gotta do? Anyway, I apologize, no more lame jokes. So yeah, the two of them raced towards the weapon, but while they did so, the sorceress and Orko had their own thing to do. They went back to the ancient past of Eternia because they needed to learn where this new sword had come from, and their search took them to Eternia, the old era of Eternia, and it was here that they witnessed the early days of what would become Castle Grayskull itself. Back then, the world had leaders known as the Quadrant of Powers, and these leaders gathered to handle the affairs of Eternia. At the time, there was concern that technology could one day take the place of magic and replace it everywhere. And if you think about it, all of God and his various miracles have just ceased to exist after the invention of camera. Like, what's up with that? Anyway, so the sorcerers of that age made a proposal. Eldor, who kept the Book of Living Spells and used the magic of light, turned it to Gray, who was an early scientist and engineer. Gray was asked to help create a fortress that could hold the greatest magical knowledge of the ancestors inside a skull-shaped key. I hope the name Gray has, rung a bell by now. So the four powers of Eternia accepted the plan, and Castle Grayskull was built. But then the Snake Men betrayed the others after they realized the power inside of Gray's skull could be taken for themselves, and this led to the Great Wars between the forces of Gray's skull and the Snake Men, and those wars destroyed most of the old records. So if people later had no proper history of the place, well, there's the reason. The whole archive basically got buried under war, betrayal, and snake drama. Very Eternia, really. Gray himself also looked a lot like Hero, the first warrior who used the power of Gray's skull and defeated the Snake Man. And that was crucial because it pretty much connected the castle, the power, and the old heroic line much closer than before. You have to realize at this point that the power of Grayskull is not some vague magical phrase thing anymore, and had come from Gray's skull, the fortress made by Gray, one of Eternia's first science engineer types. Then came the Sword of Flaws, the purple sword at the center of this story. Gray had created it as a failsafe for the power of Gray's skull. He understood that magic had greater force than science, and he feared what could happen if all magical knowledge sat in one place. And when used with kindness, that power could help life across the universe. But when used with cruelty, it could rule over everything. So the Sword of Flaws was made as an answer to that danger, although its exact powers had not yet been revealed. Unfortunately, or maybe disastrously, the purple sword went to Skeletor, the one guy who had spent his life after the power of Grayskull for the worst reasons. So, the weapon made to stop someone like him had somehow ended up in his hand. So, that's what happened in the most recent comics. Now, let's check out the 2 live-action movies, starting with the 1987 live-action movies Castle Grayskull. The craziest part of the Dolph Lundgren star is that in this one, Skeletor actually managed to get a hold of Castle Grayskull. And the first time we see Grayskull is when the movie shows Skeletor roaming across its throne room. This version of the castle looked very different from the Grayskull we knew from the cartoons and comics, mostly because the movie had 0 budget and much of its props had been rehashed from another canceled movie. Anyway, the throne room had the throne placed far back, beyond a marble base that rested above pillars and a metal-like framework with a pretty deep abyss under it. The floor itself had 4 large gaps, so the people inside had to move across broad paths between them. Like, for some reason, they had to turn it into a booby trap kind of thing, and basically, you take one wrong step and you find yourself in a shitload of trouble. Along the back section, tall elder statues lined both sides, while the front part was narrower and had columns on either side, almost like a formal hall before the main throne area. Near the throne, Skeletor had trapped the sorceress inside an energy field, and her power was slowly being passed to him. So, Castle Grayskull became his headquarters for much of the movie, which must have felt like a dream come true for him. I mean, you know, skull face and all. The film also gave the castle a huge circular portal called the Great Eye of the Galaxy. This portal would only open when Eternia's moon reached its highest point, and whoever stood before it could attain godlike power. The movie didn't really care to explain every little bit of detail, but the visuals strongly suggest that the Sword of Grayskull had to be placed into a small column near the portal. The narration also pretty much exaggerated the castle, because according to it, Castle Grayskull was actually at the very center of the universe. And not just that, it was apparently also the boundary between light and darkness. It would have been nice to see some of these grand claims to have some logical backing, but no. Anyway, outside the castle appeared far less often, and the usual features like the drawbridge and the inner facilities didn't get much attention. Again, the only logical reason behind this are the budgetary constraints.
Everything changed since you left.
The 2026 live-action movies Castle Grayskull. As could be expected, Castle Grayskull appeared in the 2026 movie as well, in all its striking glory. In the movie, Skeletor spends a hell of a lot of time, energy, and effort into getting his hands on He-Man's power sword. And when he finally gets it, the loser figures he can't really wield its powers, and that he can't gain access to the power of Grayskull, which is when Evil Lynn suggests that they go to Castle Grayskull, where she would be able to perform a ritual to help Skeletor with what he needed. And yeah, they do head there, but Skeletor ends up as just a skull at the end of the movie. So yeah, guys, that was all for this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons and ringing that bell icon so that you don't miss any more of our videos about He-Man, the Masters of the Universe. Those 3 small clicks from you help us tremendously in bringing you more awesome videos like this. Stay safe and have a good one. And as always, stay marvelous.